The galaxy was a place of endless conflict where ancient civilizations waged war against each other in the cold void of space. The Xynar were a ruthless insectoid race known for their insatiable hunger for expansion and domination. Their fleets roamed from system to system, burning worlds to ashes and enslaving whatever species they found in their path. The rest of the galaxy had learned to survive under the shadow of their cruelty, forming coalitions and alliances in a desperate bid for survival. But no one had ever expected the humans to be anything other than a curiosity, a primitive species, barely reaching the technological level of space travel. When the Xynar turned their attention to Earth, their arrival was swift, and without warning, the humans were no match for their advanced weapons and overwhelming numbers. The first attack was devastating. Entire cities fell within hours. The skies were darkened by the silhouettes of Xynar warships that blotted out the sun as they rained fire down upon the planet's defenses and military installations. Humanity had no hope, no real way of fighting back. They were outgunned, outnumbered, and outclassed in every way. The world fell into chaos as governments crumbled and people fled to underground bunkers to hide from the terror that had arrived. But something else stirred in humanity, something primal, something unyielding. Despite the odds, despite the overwhelming sense of defeat, there was a fire that burned within them, a refusal to be extinguished. Humans were not like other species. They didn't simply accept their fate, they fought. And when they fought dirty, using everything at their disposal to outthink and outlast an enemy they had no hope of defeating in a traditional battle. While the Xynar focused on obliterating military targets, the humans focused on survival. They began to organize resistance cells in every major city and head out, taking advantage of the chaos to strike back when and where the invaders least expected it. They used their knowledge of the terrain, their urban environments, their creativity, and above all their tenacity to create havoc in the Xynar supply lines, sabotage their equipment, and slow their overwhelming advance. One such victory came when a group of civilian engineers turned soldiers infiltrated a Xynar transport fleet disguised as part of the enemy convoy. They managed to plant explosives within the ships and destroy them from the inside out. Though it was a minor blow, it sent ripples throughout the Xynar forces. It was the first taste of resistance that they had faced, and it wasn't something they were prepared for. Humanity wasn't supposed to be able to do that. The news of the attack spread across the globe, and something shifted in the human spirit. A sense of defiance began to take root. The human race had just shown the galaxy that they were not just weaklings who could be crushed without a second thought. Their survival instinct had kicked in, and they were willing to fight to the bitter end. The Xynar underestimated them, and that would prove to be their greatest mistake, for humanity had something the Xynar could never understand: the will to survive at any cost. As the weeks passed, the humans adapted. Their resistance began to spread like wildfire across the planet. Cells popped up in every major city in the world. Small bands of civilians became hardened fighters, using their knowledge of their cities to launch hit and run attacks on the Xynar supply chains and outposts. The Xynar had never faced anything like it before. Their soldiers were used to overwhelming their enemies with brute force. But humanity was unpredictable. They didn't follow the usual rules of war. They fought with wild abandon and a relentless drive that couldn't be measured by technology or firepower. The Xynar began to feel the pressure for the first time. The first victory had been small, but it was enough to spark a change in the galaxy. And soon after, the message reached the ears of other galactic powers, many of whom had been watching Earth with mild curiosity. They had long been watching the Xynar's expansion, but most had kept their distance. Earth seemed to be another insignificant world on the brink of being destroyed, but the humans had defied the odds, and that was enough to get their attention. The first to respond were the Trivans, a species known for their speed and agility in battle. They had been fighting the Xynar for years and had suffered heavy losses in the process. They were intrigued by humanity's resilience and offered their support, sending covert messages to resistance leaders on Earth with intel and weapons to aid in their fight. Other species followed the Azure with their vast networks of spies, and the Zarak, who were masters of cyber warfare, All offered their help in ways they had never considered before. The message was clear: humanity was not alone, and they were not going to fall quietly into the void. With the help of these new allies, humanity began to train more advanced fighters and began to use the stolen Cynar technology they had been able to capture over the last few months in ways that shocked even their alien allies. The humans were able to reverse engineer alien tech faster than anyone had anticipated, and even though their designs were crude, they were effective. They began producing ships that could hold their own in battle against the Cynar and weapons that could pierce their defenses. The first test of this new technology came during the liberation of Paris, a city that had been under Cynar control for months. It was a symbol of human resistance and a morale booster for the entire planet. If they could take it back, they would send a message to the galaxy that Earth was not a lost cause. The battle was brutal. The streets ran with blood, but the humans fought with everything they had. They used the streets to their advantage. They flooded the subways with explosives and used the high ground of the Eiffel Tower to snipe at Cynar soldiers. From a distance, the tide began to shift when a group of human engineers who had been hiding beneath the city for weeks managed to disable a critical Cynar weapon that had been used to tear apart resistance groups. The explosion that followed shook the entire city and crippled the Cynar's hold on Paris. From that moment forward, humans knew they could do more than just survive. They could win. They could take the fight to the invaders. And for the first time, the galaxy saw that Earth was a force to be reckoned with. With each passing day, the human resistance grew stronger. The war was no longer just a desperate struggle for survival. It had become a battle of ingenuity and resolve. Humanity's refusal to quit began to take on a life of its own. As more and more people joined the fight, they brought with them new ideas, new methods of warfare that defied the conventions that Cynar were used to. They began to develop tactics that the enemy simply couldn't predict. Humans fought not with sheer might, but with an unrelenting drive that didn't understand the concept of giving up. The Cynar found themselves stretched thin, fighting on multiple fronts as they tried to quash the growing rebellion. But every time they thought they had the upper hand, the humans would turn the tables in ways that left them stunned. One such moment occurred when the Cynar launched an all-out assault on a hidden human base located in the dense jungles of Southeast Asia. The base was home to a critical manufacturing facility where humans were building their own version of Cynar technology. That Cynar knew if they could wipe it out, the humans would lose their ability to produce weapons and ships that could stand up to their forces. They thought it would be an easy victory, but they had underestimated the human spirit. The resistance had set up a series of booby traps throughout the jungle, using the environment to their advantage in ways that Cynar couldn't anticipate. The first wave of invaders walked right into a series of explosives that decimated their ranks. The second wave was caught in a web of hidden snares that pulled them off balance and exposed them to human snipers positioned in the trees. The battle turned into a chaotic, disorienting melee where the Cynar were being picked off piece by piece in a way that no one had expected. Humans didn't care about the rules of engagement or even playing fair. They were fighting for their homes, for their families. And the enemy wasn't just some faceless invader. It was the enemy that threatened to erase everything they had ever known and loved. The final blow came when a human-led sabotage team infiltrated a Cynar command center deep within the jungle. They managed to plant an explosive device on the central power grid, disabling the entire Cynar communication network in the region. The remaining Cynar soldiers were left in complete disarray as human forces moved in to mop up the rest of the enemy forces that had been left stranded without coordination. The victory was not just a blow to the Cynar military, but a declaration to the galaxy that humanity would never simply roll over and die. They had learned the art of war quickly and effectively, and they were only getting better. The resistance was no longer just about survival. It was about fighting for a future, and the Cynar had no idea what they were up against. Soon after the victory in Southeast Asia, human engineers and military leaders began working together on an ambitious new project, a fleet of ships designed to challenge the Cynar on their own turf. These ships were a far cry from the sleek advanced vessels that Cynar commanded, but they were built with human resilience at their core. They were tough, heavy ships built to endure a brutal fight. and keep on going no matter the odds. The human fleet was born from scrap metal and scavenged parts, a patchwork of different technologies pieced together by people who had nothing but determination, and the knowledge that they had nothing left to lose. The first test flight was nothing short of a spectacle. As the ships took to the skies, they wobbled and groaned under the strain. But they flew, and for the first time in this war, the Xinar felt a flicker of doubt. Maybe, just maybe, humanity was more than they could ever imagine. As humanity's resistance grew stronger, the Xinar found themselves stretched thin, battling on multiple fronts across the galaxy. They had underestimated the humans, and now they were beginning to see the cost of their arrogance. While the humans fought for their very survival, they had also begun to forge alliances with other species who had suffered under the Xinar's cruelty. The first to join forces with humanity were the Trivens, a race known for their swiftness and agility. In battle, the Trivens had long fought the Xinar, but had been crushed by their superior numbers. Their fleet was small, and their weapons outdated, but their speed in combat was unmatched. When they saw the humans fighting back with ingenuity and resilience, they knew they had found an ally worthy of trust, and together they began to share knowledge and tactics that would make them stronger in battle. The second to ally with the humans were the Aesir, a species of cold-blooded diplomats and spies who had long worked in the shadows to weaken the Xinar's grip on the galaxy. The Aesir had no love for the Xinar, but their interests had always been focused on subterfuge and manipulation. They had stayed out of the war for as long as they could, but the Xinar's increasing power had begun to threaten their own existence. When they saw humanity's potential, they recognized that the humans had something the galaxy needed: the power of unity and the will to fight. The Aesir began sharing intelligence with the humans, guiding them toward key Xinar supply lines and command centers, while the Trevens gave them the means to strike fast and hard together. The growing alliance was a force unlike anything the Xinar had encountered in centuries, but the humans knew that they still had a long way to go before they could truly challenge the Xinar. They were still vastly outnumbered, and their technology was nowhere near as advanced as that of their enemies. But what they lacked in tech, they made up for in heart and determination. The next step in their war effort came when a joint human-Trivan task force launched a daring raid on a critical Xinar production facility on the outskirts of the galaxy. It was located on a heavily fortified moon that had been used to build and deploy the Xinar's most powerful warships. The mission was considered a suicide run by many in the Alliance, but the humans saw it as a chance to deal a devastating blow to the Xinar's war machine. Under the cover of darkness, the Trivan fighters slipped past enemy patrols using their superior speed, while human soldiers aboard the newly designed Vanguard-class ships led the charge on the surface. The battle was fierce as the task force fought their way through the moon's defenses, but the humans had learned how to outsmart the Xinar, and when the Trivens disabled the moon's power grid, the human forces moved in to plant explosives that would take down the entire facility in a matter of hours. The Xinar forces were caught off guard, unable to react fast enough to the human speed and cunning. The explosion that followed shook the entire moon, sending debris scattering into space as the production facility was wiped from existence. It was a victory that sent shockwaves across the galaxy. The Xinar realized that their war machine was no longer invincible, and for the first time since the conflict had started, it was clear that humanity was no longer just a minor player. They were a threat that Xinar could no longer ignore, and the growing alliance that humans had forged with these once unlikely allies proved that together they were stronger than any enemy could have imagined. After the destruction of the Xinar production facility, humanity and its allies began to realize something crucial. The Xinar were not invincible. They had been seen as an unstoppable force for so long, but each victory, no matter how small, chipped away at that perception. Humanity's ingenuity and their ability to think outside the box were beginning to show cracks in the Xinar's seemingly impenetrable armor. But there was still a long way to go. The humans needed more than just small victories. They needed a shift in momentum, a game changer, something that would force the Xenar to confront the reality that their conquest was no longer assured. For that, humanity would need to dig deep into their arsenal of sheer determination and creativity. Humanity's first major breakthrough came when a team of human engineers managed to reverse engineer one of the Xenar's most terrifying weapons, a plasma cannon, capable of vaporizing entire ships with a single blast. It had been a weapon that gave the Xenar overwhelming power in space battles. But the human engineers saw an opportunity. They scavenged the wreckage of Xenar ships after skirmishes and began experimenting with their tech in a way no one else had before. They didn't have the resources to replicate it perfectly, but they did have the will to make it work. They modified the plasma cannon, creating a hybrid version that was far more unstable, but much more powerful. When the test fire took place on a small captured Xenar warship, the resulting explosion was nothing short of spectacular. The ship disintegrated into a cloud of burning debris. But the humans had what they needed, a weapon capable of rivaling the Xenar's power. And with this new weapon, they were ready to launch an assault on one of the most heavily fortified Xenar strongholds located at the edge of the galaxy. It was a risky operation. To say the least, the stronghold was protected by multiple layers of defense, from orbital shields to automated drones and drones to weapons platforms. The Xenar had spared no expense to protect it. But the human alliance was undeterred. They had come to rely on the element of surprise and unpredictability to get the upper hand. And this mission was no different. The plan was simple and insane in equal measure. A small human-led strike force would infiltrate the stronghold's outer perimeter using a fleet of new stealth ships designed to look like part of the debris field surrounding the stronghold. The Trivens would move in first, clearing the way with their speed and agility, while the humans waited for the right moment to strike the final blow, a direct assault on the central power core that would cripple the stronghold's defenses for good. When the attack began, the Xenar were taken completely by surprise. Their orbital shields had been overloaded by a decoy strike from the Trivens, and the stealth ships had slipped past their radar, undetected in the chaos. The human strike force emerged from the debris field and launched their modified plasma cannon at the heart of the stronghold. The blast was devastating. It tore through the stronghold's energy core and set off a chain reaction that crippled its systems, sending the entire station into a state of emergency. The Xenar's greatest asset had been reduced to a burning hulk in space. Within minutes, the remaining Xenar forces had no choice but to retreat. The explosion was felt across the galaxy, and the message was loud and clear. The tide had turned. Humanity was no longer a weak species to be written off as an afterthought. Their ability to innovate under pressure and create unexpected solutions had made them a formidable force, and they had just taken one of the most powerful Xenar strongholds off the map. In one fell swoop, this victory reverberated throughout the galaxy and gave hope to every species under the Xenar's heel. The war was no longer a hopeless cause. It was something they could win, and for the first time the Xenar were starting to realize that humanity had become their worst nightmare. The victory over the Xenar stronghold marked a turning point in the war. It was no longer just about defending their homes or surviving the next assault. Humanity had proven that they could take the fight to the heart of the Xenar Empire and emerge victorious. The tide had truly turned, but the Xenar were not a species to admit defeat easily. Their arrogance had been shaken, but not broken. They began to regroup and reassess their strategy, and when they did, their response was as ruthless as ever. Humanity's new strength had drawn attention across the galaxy, but it had also made them a target. The Xenar understood one simple truth: if they couldn't break humanity's will to fight, then they would destroy everything that humans held dear. In an attempt to grind them into submission, they initiated their next phase of the war by launching an all-out assault on Earth itself. The full might of the Xenar fleet descended on the planet with a ferocity that humanity had never experienced before. The skies over Earth darkened as the massive warships blotted out the sun. Their plasma cannons opened fire, turning entire cities into smoking craters in a matter of moments. The humans had never faced such a concentrated assault on their homeworld. The Xenar were no longer concerned with the human resistance. They were determined to end the war by exterminating the very core of the rebellion. The capital cities were targeted first, and then the Xinar began systematically dismantling the planet's defenses. Military bases were obliterated, power grids were severed, communications lines were destroyed, and the remaining human forces were forced to fall back to underground bunkers to survive. The scale of the destruction was staggering. Entire continents were left in ruin, and the human population was brought to its knees. For the first time since the war began, humanity felt the full weight of the Xinar's wrath. But even in the face of overwhelming odds, the human spirit did not break. Instead, it hardened. It became more resolute. The resistance fighters who had once struck from the shadows began to rally their forces openly. Their message was clear. If the Xinar thought they could break humanity by destroying Earth, then they were gravely mistaken. Earth was not just a planet, it was a symbol, it was the heart of the resistance. And if the Xinar thought they could crush that heart, then they would have to tear apart the very fabric of what made humanity who they were. In response to the Xinar's onslaught, the human leaders called upon their allies for help. The Trivans, the Uzir, the Zarak, and every other species that had joined their cause answered the call. They sent every ship they had, every soldier, every resource to the planet to fight alongside humanity in its darkest hour. They knew the fight was no longer just about Earth, it was about the future of the galaxy, and the Xinar had made a grave mistake by making humanity their enemy. The battle for Earth raged on for weeks. The skies above the planet were filled with the smoke of burning ships and the flash of weaponry as human and allied forces fought tooth and nail to defend their home. The Xinar were relentless, but so were the humans. They fought with everything they had, and they were not alone. The galaxy was watching, and the galaxy was learning from the humans what it meant to fight for survival, to fight for a future, even when the odds seemed insurmountable. And as the war raged on, the Xinar began to realize something they had feared for far too long. Humanity's refusal to die would be their ultimate undoing. The battle for Earth had become a war of attrition. Every day brought fresh waves of Xinar ships and new horrors, but the human forces refused to give in. They had dug in deep, and now they were fighting for every inch of their world. The once bustling cities had been reduced to ruins, but beneath the surface humanity continued to fight from underground bunkers and hidden bases where they patched up their wounded and prepared for the next assault. The Xinar were relentless. Their bombardments never stopped. Their ground forces moved through the wasteland of Earth, crushing everything in their path. But humanity was no longer fighting as individuals. They had become an army of resistance, a united force that included not just humans, but every ally they had made across the galaxy. The Trivans flew with unmatched speed through the chaos of battle, while the Uzir used their intricate knowledge of the enemy's tactics to exploit every weakness. The Zarak hacked into Xinar communications, scrambling their plans and leaving their forces in disarray. On the surface, human soldiers fought with an intensity the Xinar had never expected. Guerrilla warfare in the ruins of the world's great cities had become their specialty. The humans didn't care about rules or conventions. They fought like wild animals, cornered and desperate. They used the rubble of their fallen cities to create traps and ambushes, striking from the shadows and disappearing before the Xinar could retaliate. Their ingenuity had turned their home into a battlefield that the Xinar couldn't control. Every moment was a struggle, but humanity held its ground as the war raged on Earth. Itself began to change in ways that no one could predict. The planet's once lush forests and vibrant oceans had been replaced by barren wastelands, scorched by Xinar fire. But the humans fought on, as if they had nothing left to lose. And that was when the unthinkable happened. A single human ship piloted by one of their best engineers made it through the heart of the Xinar fleet. It was a ship unlike any other, crude and unrefined, but brimming with human determination. The ship had been retrofitted with the most advanced version of their modified plasma cannon, the very weapon that had torn apart the Xinar stronghold at the edge of the galaxy. And now it was humanity's last hope. The ship, known as the Vanguard, was a symbol of humanity's strength, a desperate, reckless gamble that could turn the tide of the war if it succeeded. The crew of the Vanguard had only one mission: to infiltrate the Xinar flagship and disable their command center. The flagship was the heart of the Xinar war effort. Without it, their entire fleet would collapse into disarray. The plan was dangerous. Suicide, many had called it. But the crew was made up of veterans and engineers who had lived through the worst of the war. They didn't hesitate. Their mission was to take down the Xenar once and for all. The Vanguard slipped into the heart of the Xenar fleet, undetected, its crew using their knowledge of the Xenar systems to bypass security measures and disable key systems aboard the flagship. The battle was vicious and intense. The crew fought their way through the Xenar's defenses with a brutality that mirrored the war they had fought so long, but they knew they couldn't fail. The future of their species depended on it. As they planted the final explosive charge deep within the heart of the flagship, they knew there was no turning back. That Xenar might have underestimated humanity's ingenuity and will, but the humans had one final trick up their sleeves, and they were about to unleash it. As the explosive charges were set, and the countdown began aboard the Vanguard, the fate of humanity hung in the balance. The crew members knew that their sacrifice might be the last thing standing between their species and extinction, but they also knew that they had already won something that Xenar could never understand: the will to keep fighting no matter the cost below them. The Xenar flagship loomed like a monstrous beast in the heart of the enemy fleet. It was the nerve center of the entire Xenar war effort, and it had to be destroyed if the war was ever to end. The humans and their allies had already dealt a series of blows to the Xenar that had weakened their grip on the galaxy, but this strike, this one final blow, would be the one that crippled them for good. The crew of the Vanguard fought tooth and nail through the flagship's corridors, their weapons clashing against Xenar soldiers in a battle that raged like a storm. With each moment that passed, the ship grew ever closer to destruction, but it was not without cost. One by one, the crew members fell their sacrifices, allowing the rest to push forward with grim determination. Finally, at the heart of the flagship, the last remaining crew member, a human captain, made it to the control room. As the Xenar commanders scrambled to mount a defense, they were too late. The captain, covered in the blood of both friend and foe, activated the final charge and watched as the heart of the Xenar flagship exploded in a blinding flash that shook the entire battlefield. The chain reaction was immediate. Xenar ships in the vicinity began to lose their cohesion. Their communication networks scrambled into chaos, and the flagship began to disintegrate under the pressure of its own collapsing systems. The shockwave rippled across the galaxy and reached every corner where the Xenar had dominated. It was a signal, not just of humanity's triumph, but of the end of an era. The Xenar had been powerful because they believed that they were invincible. Their greatest mistake had been underestimating the relentless power of those who refused to give up when they were knocked down. The Xenar had never expected their worst enemy to be the species that never stopped fighting, never stopped innovating, and never stopped surviving. What followed was the collapse of the Xenar war machine. Their fleets scattered, their planets abandoned, and their empire that had once seemed so unshakable crumbled into dust. And yet, even in victory, humanity knew that the war had taken its toll. The Earth was scared, its cities reduced to rubble, and the cost of the struggle weighed heavily on their shoulders. But they had saved their world, they had saved themselves, and in doing so, they had shown the galaxy that humanity was not a species to be underestimated any longer. The universe now understood that humans did not just survive. They thrived. They would rebuild, stronger than before, and they would remember the lessons of this war. That unity, resilience, and the will to fight could defeat even the most powerful adversary. The war had ended, but the story of humanity's fight for survival would be told across the stars for generations to come, a reminder that sometimes the greatest weapon in the universe isn't a gun or a ship. It's the spirit of those who refuse to be defeated. The humans had turned the tide of a galactic war with nothing but grit and determination, and the Xenar would never forget the lesson they had learned that day.